it looks like we have everybody in, so why don't we get going here? For those of you that just joined us, my name is Jay Josker. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations at Canisius High School. With me, as always, on the call is Spencer Farrell from the class of 2008. Spencer is our incoming president of the Alumni Board, and this speaker series was his brainchild, so we forced him to show up on every single one of these calls. We have a very special guest today, Mark Giangreco from the class of 1970. Mark got his start in the media world as a cartoonist for the Citadel. He's a graduate of Dayton and has worked in for the last 30 years as a sports multimedia journalist in Chicago and is currently at the ABC affiliate. And he also has the most popular sports radio talk show in Chicago on their ESPN affiliate. So Mark's going to talk to us tonight about his past 30 years in Chicago sports. I know the Bulls documentary has been on everybody's mind lately with no other sports to speak of. A couple of reminders before we get going. We're going to record this tonight and it'll be up on our website a little later. If everyone could keep themselves on mute while Mark is talking, we'll open it up to questions a little later. And you can also use the chat function to ask questions as we're going through the session tonight. So with that, I will turn it over to Mark. Mark, welcome and thank you.
Jay, thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm honored. I'll tell you, I'm actually been in Chicago 39 years now. So you dialed it back a little bit. I went to Louisville after I left Dayton. When I finally graduated from UD, it took me about 5.5 years because I had already gotten a radio job at the big top 40 rock station downtown. Stayed there for a few years, went to Louisville, Kentucky, where my first night on TV, I was very nervous. I got through the sportscast and one of the viewers called and the phone's right there. Our desk was part of the set. And I answered the phone and the guy said, "Hey, you that new sportscaster?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "What are you, some kind of Puerto Rican or what?" And I said, "Ooh, this is not the right market." But I learned everything I know about television at Channel 32 there in Louisville and then came to Chicago in 1982, worked at NBC for 12 years. And now in my 26th year at ABC. And we're very lucky during these times because we're the big powerhouse here. We're number one in every newscast and have been for 30 years. And I guess, though, you could say we're the tallest midget right now. I mean, revenue is off 50% at most stations. The internet, social media, obviously has been cutting into our audience dramatically over these years. And then the pandemic and the protesting and the looting and everything, and just the world upside down has actually caused a bigger tune in on local news. But at the same time, advertisers are not prone to be shelling out money. So it's a challenging time right now, but I'm lucky to still be working and still having fun with it.
Cool. So, I mean, I think most of us has probably seen the documentary about the 97-98 Chicago Bulls. Do you want to take a little time? And I mean, you had a front row seat to that, right? So do you want to take a little time and tell us, what it was like to be there for not just the 97-98 team, but for the run of that dynasty, and then maybe, what you thought about the documentary itself and how true it was to what you actually saw?
Sure. I was really lucky to have the entire ride, all 6 NBA championships, and to learn how to walk backwards and ask questions at the same time, chasing Michael Jordan all over the globe for all those years. Went to France with him for the McDonald's tournament, which was basically a tune-up for Team USA, the dream team. And then, that run of championships, obviously, as Sade would say, the first time, it's never as good as the first time. So my favorite experience was the very first championship against the Lakers. But through all of them, it was incredible to follow Michael because he really, really, truly is the most intense and most competitive human being on the planet. And sometimes you're like, Mike, just let it go, really. And having to play with him was almost as bad as playing against him. He abused his teammates in practice. He was so demanding, but it was great to get some insight with him. And he was always available to us. But each championship run was very different. Now, looking at The Last Dance, it was great for all of us in this market who were working back then to revisit that. We all lived it, but back in the moment, all you cared about was the next live shot, the next opportunity to get in the locker room, to get post game, edit that stuff, get it on the air, get on the plane, get back, try to beat the competition. Don't ever get beat on a story. It was so intense every day on that playoff road that you really didn't have any time to enjoy it. Well, now, there's a bunch of us that are still working here who, lived it 22 years ago, and we are looking forward to seeing everything put in perspective and on a timeline, because, you forget a lot of things. You take things out of context. Well, the director, Jason Hare, he kept going back and forth, 98 back to, 92. The whole twist on the documentary was going back and forth in time. So it was a little confusing for people watching it over the first time, but it gave us a lot of context. And, let me just say this up front. We needed this so badly. People were desperate for sports content. This filled the bill and more, the highest rated documentary in the history of ESPN. But, it was controlled by Michael. And it was his decision to let it sit for 22 years. And he just determined that it was time to release it, because I'm convinced he was tired of hearing, the last two generations say LeBron was better than Michael. So he wanted to make sure everybody saw him in action, and to where everybody go, oh, right, my bad, I'm sorry. And the producers are all his guys, his inner circle. He handpicked the director. So, yeah, most of it was accurate, but it's all through Michael's eyes. And, a lot of stuff hit the floor, and he had, last say on everything and every edit. So just take that with a grain of salt. There were a lot of, diehard journalists. Ken Burns, first and foremost, criticized it, saying it's not really a documentary. It's not true journalism, because it's all slanted from Michael's view. Yeah, that's true. People in Chicago didn't care, though. I mean, he is the icon of icon. He is the god. But just like everybody else, he's very, he's got his warts, and they come out. But yeah, we enjoy. I think episode 7, they were really running out of stuff, because they took my live shot of his retirement news conference, the first retirement. And I was tap dancing and vamping for about 15 minutes, waiting for everybody to come in. And there were thousands of, radio and TV people there, and newspaper people. And I was basically naming everyone in the room just to fill time. And they finally came in and sat down, and I made the comment, this looks like the Last Supper, And so it went on and on and on. And, you have to take advantage of those opportunities personally as a reporter, to try to kind of outshadow your competition. So I asked the first question, and then I asked the second question, then I asked another question, and then I asked a fourth question. And it's Michael and I going back and forth. And Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner, finally leaned into him, but happened to have the microphone right there, going, take some questions for somebody other than Giangreco, and my college roommates are calling me from North Carolina going, dude, I just heard you get dissed on the radio. But that was an amazing, amazing thing to relive it and enjoy it. But everybody who worked in this town got their, 5 minutes of relived fame by watching it.
Very cool. Do you, in terms of access, you mentioned you got to pepper Michael with 4 questions. Thinking back to that time and kind of knowing what you know now about media access, do you feel like there's more access now, less access? Are there more reporters in the room? What are the differences between, I guess, media access from the 90s to currently?
There is almost zero access now compared to what it used to be. And there are so many more outlets. We have so many more social media, internet outlets, and you still have your radio and TV people. And yes, there are a few newspapers that are still in business, and blogs and everything else. So you have more media, less access. We are in a day now where every professional team, every college team controls their product to the nth degree. They sanitize it, they protect it. They all have their own media departments. They have their own cameramen, their own reporters who do stories and really fun, nice, cool features on all their players. Obviously, they would never touch a controversial issue. That's why we need to still be in the mix. But it's really frustrating for me, coming from old school, where we're chasing guys up and down the hallway, going in the shower practically, in the locker room, totally, total access. Now it's so sanitized to where they'll bring a couple players out to a podium. Everybody gets the same stuff. Very limited access. Now, with the pandemic, it's even worse. And now I'm thoroughly convinced that all these teams are going to use this situation to just do Zoom interviews from here on in. We won't be allowed in the dugout. We won't be allowed in the clubhouse. We won't be allowed in locker rooms, on the court. I mean, this is a perfect excuse for them to deny regular media the opportunity to get close to the players. So it's very disconcerting for me, having been able to just enterprise a story by just going after a guy, and catch him on the fly. Now you got to make an appointment. You've got to make a specific request. It's really annoying, really frustrating. And frankly, the NFL is the worst. And the Bears are the worst of all the NFL teams, where they don't need us and they don't want us there. So they make it as difficult as possible to keep us out. But we're not going to give up.
It's kind of a good segue into my next question. You've been doing this for 39 years. What is the biggest change? And maybe that was it. What is the biggest change that you've had to adapt to over that time period?
Well, in addition to limited access, and you have to take what you get and try to be enterprising with that. With the advent of the internet, and specifically social media, and you've got Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all this stuff, the only way you compete with social media is to use social media. I mean, every player's got his own website. Every player's posting great videos. Rex Chapman's made a whole second career out of all these great feel-good videos that you see. I use all that stuff. I end every one of my sportscasts with something that I think is funny. We call it a closer or a kicker. I want to leave everybody laughing or crying, or some controversial piece of video that has some talkability with the anchors. And I really want to play with all the video. I love putting the shows together. And you can't sit there and just do a straight sportscast anymore like it's breaking news. I write in the context and in the tense that I assume everybody's already read the story. Everybody's already heard it. Everybody's already seen the video. So you have to make people tune in and say, okay, what's he going to do with it? I'll be interested to see what kind of twist is he going to put on it. You have to advance the story. And I always write it as if everybody already has seen it or knows it, and then kind of tweak it a little bit. That's the only way you stand out now.
Any thoughts on how guys like Jordan or maybe Dennis Rodman would have used social media if it was available to them back in the day?
Oh, Rodman would have been kicked off every social media platform, but it would have been great stuff until he did. I mean, he's still out of control and vulgar and crazy and sick as hell. He was just having dinner at my favorite restaurant here, Chicago Cut, in Chicago with Chris Chelios. And the two of them, they could tell a million stories between them. But I got along with Rodman so well. I remember one of my very first stories when I jumped from Channel 5 to Channel 7 here. And by the way, we are ABC 7 Eyewitness News also, and we're as popular as the Irv Weinstein days back in the 60s and 70s when Channel 7 dominated Buffalo. So it's great to be on this team. But I think one of the first stories I ever did when I came to Channel 7 was interview Rodman about all his tattoos. And back then, that's when, athletes were really getting tatted up and they were really getting a lot of ink. And so I started with Rodman, and he explained every single tattoo. And then, we interviewed some, suburban white girls playing basketball at DePaul, and they have a little tattoo here and there. So, everyone had varying degrees of ink. So we did this whole spot, and I'm getting a tattoo while we're doing this interview. And it's the Circle 7 logo. And then at the end of the piece, I say, hey, great job. And I pull up my other arm and I say, can you take this off? And it was the NBC Peacock. And Dennis thought that was great. So he would have just gone absolutely nuts with it, and his videos would have been X-rated for sure. Michael would have used it during his career to taunt the opposition. You watch The Last Dance, you talk about he always had to create a chip on his shoulder, and just make stuff up, and the whole thing with Brian Russell and, he always picked out an opponent and then If the opponent dogged him, then he used that as motivation. And if nobody did, he just made it up. He just made it up.
Yeah.
So Michael would have used it to taunt the competition, I think, for sure. Let me dip down here and power up my phone.
Sure, no problem. You'd kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, talking about like the changes with COVID and everything. What do you see? I mean, outside of COVID, obviously kind of changing everything, are there any major changes that you see coming to sports media in the future that we aren't already talking about, I guess?
Yeah, I think the pandemic has accelerated the whole Zoom thing. Like, teams will look at this, and really what I'm very afraid of, that local news management will look at this and say, hey, we've got all these people working from home. We got reporters on the street. Nobody's coming in. News conferences for sure will all be Zoomed, I assume, or they'll have a pool camera. And the immediate thing is then, okay, we can lay off some camera people. We don't need to be sending crews out around the city. Boom, we just Zoom the politician. We just Zoom the players, Zoom the manager or the coach. And I'm afraid that's what it's going to come down to, because Friday, the Cubs and Sox are going to start their workouts at Guaranteed Rate and Wrigley. And while we can shoot some of the workout, we have to wait for the Zoom interviews afterwards. And I think that you're just going to see more and more of this. This just accelerates what the future was already holding for us, that television's going to look like this instead of, a bunch of microphones in somebody's face outside.
Do you think it takes away a little bit? I mean, it seems to me that when you have someone embedded with a team or traveling or getting to know, these guys on a more personal level, it would give reporters an ability to pull out some of those personal stories that maybe some of the team guys might not be able to or wouldn't go near. Do you think that's the case? Is that going to affect some of the reporting that we see or don't see, especially in a time when, especially now with we're all starved for anything? It seems like the 24-hour cycle, you're always looking for something to read. It seems like you'd want more people to have access, no?
Yes, this is a problem right now, given all the fake news that is out there. Depending on your perspective, wherever you get your news, that's what you consider to be fact. And if you're going to rely on strictly Fox News or strictly CNN or strictly MSNBC, and you're going to have one view, and it's just going to be reinforced by the people who watch with you or people who react on social media. In sports, if you solely rely on what these teams are putting out, then you're not getting the real story, and the fans need to know. And, a lot of newspaper guys, a lot of beat writers who, have been covering one team for many, many years, they have a connection with players and they can get more out of them. And, TV guys, we're more like hit and run, get a good soundbite and get out of there. But I'd like to think that we're just as capable or more than capable than the young guys the teams are hiring just to do the pretty sound bites and talk about players' contributions to the community. I mean, it's our duty to break stories, good or bad, and, try to get guys to relate to us on our terms.
You talked about the Sox and the Reds starting workout soon. What do you think? I mean, a lot of these leagues are now talking about starting games. You have, women's soccer just started the Challenge Cup, and NBA is talking about starting back up again. What do you think these leagues are going to look like? I think especially the NFL, as a season ticket holder myself, the group thread today lit up with, are we going to be able to go see games this fall? What do you think it's going to look like?
First of all, my great friend Phil Perna, also class of the 70, texted the other day saying, now that the Patriots have Cam Newton, all the Bills fans are lining up on the Peace Bridge ready to jump. But there's nothing better than a diehard season ticket holding Bills fan. I'll tell you that. More so, I think they're better fans than the Bears or anybody else, really. But I can't let anybody hear me say that here. I think, for me personally, maybe it's just, residue of a little bit of burnout because I've been doing it so long. I wouldn't mind like a 60, 70 game baseball season period. Shorten the NBA season too. Maybe shorten the NHL season a little bit, even though I'm a great hockey fan. Shorten all the seasons, tighten them up. Let's move it along. 162 games is ridiculous. Baseball's lost 3/4 of its audience because millennials can't pay attention for 9 innings. And, you know, I'm a baby boomer. I can't pay attention for 9 innings. I mean, baseball is so slow. They've got to ramp up the game without offending the traditionalists. The NBA is pretty entertaining, and it's pretty popular, especially with, you know, ethnic audiences and so forth. The NHL has its niche. Their fans are diehards, but they still don't have enough. And I hear people in my business saying they don't count as a major sport, and that's not true. But I think all the seasons will be shortened, and I think they will no longer overlap. And the thing about the NFL is it is so arrogant, and it's such this powerful conglomerate that they just assume, you know, preseason is going to happen, training camp is going to happen, they're going to play a full 16-game schedule, and screw it. Well, Dr. Fauci is my guy, so whatever he says, go. And he thinks the NFL season is very much in jeopardy. Adam Silver of the NBA, best commissioner in sports, said, hey, look, we're ready to go to the bubble and do this thing, but players are bowing out by the day. A lot are testing positive. He's ready to shut it down in a minute if things get out of hand and things don't improve in Florida. Same with Gary Bettman. The NHL is about to narrow it down to 2 hub cities. Vegas is pretty much a given, I guess. Chicago's still in the running with Toronto, Edmonton, and LA. That whole hub city thing is another form of a bubble. If there's another outbreak in any of those cities, everything's going to shut down. There are a lot of players coming out now saying the right thing to do is to cancel everything. We start over in 2021. So while we're moving forward with all this and everybody's planning on having some semblance of a season, it could all be gone in a day, really.
If leagues move to this bubble thing where everybody goes to Orlando or Las Vegas and stays there, how does that affect you guys? Are you sending one person to embed there for that amount of time, or, you know, are we back to the Zoom piece of it?
We are still talking to all the PR people at all the teams and management, and they're trying to come up with a plan. I know, and talking with Len Casper and Jim Deshaies, who call the Cubs games, Major League Baseball is thinking about making the TV play-by-play and color guys do it off monitor from home, just like they're doing Korea baseball, and maybe only letting the radio guy go on site, which I don't know if that makes any sense to me. I'd make the radio guy do it off television as well, but nothing has been nailed down yet. And that's the disturbing thing. Like, I know we'll get to Patrick Kane down the road, but Patrick has matured so much to become a team leader and a players union leader, where he's saying, whoa, wait a minute. We're not going to sign off on this makeshift season until we know what's going to happen next year. And the collective bargaining agreement and our money and the safety of our families. So everything is very much up in the air. But right now they're talking about keeping people in place and not letting a whole lot of media people in the bubble.
So, you mentioned Pat. Now's a good time as any to talk about the strong Buffalo connection with the Blackhawks. You've got Stan Bowman, who's a Canisius High School graduate, and then obviously Pat Kane's a Buffalo guy. I'd imagine there's a lot more Buffalo connections there besides those two. Have you, this is a homer question, I guess, but do you talk shop? Do you talk Buffalo shop with Pat and Stan, and do you want to talk about maybe some of the other Buffalo connections that have come through there over the years? I know Reuben Brown, came from the Bills and played for Chicago for a little while. I got to imagine there's a lot of good Buffalo stories in there.
Yeah, it's interesting. My absolute favorite time, covered 6 NBA championships, 3 Stanley Cups, 2 Super Bowls, 2 World Series. My absolute favorite was the Blackhawks' first cup winning in Philadelphia. And at that time, when we were talking about access, we were literally chasing these guys around on the ice, then up and down the hallways. I mean, we're live, running cable, going nuts, and into the locker room, into the shower, everything else. We interview everybody. It's over. People are packing up. We're all sweaty, covered in champagne. And my cameraman and I are sitting in the locker room, in the dressing room. The Stanley Cup is on the floor right there. It's Patrick Kane, Scotty Bowman, and Adam Burrish. And we're smoking cigars and drinking beer. And, we would never have that kind of access now. I mean, the next Stanley Cup, we were allowed on the ice after all the rights holders interviewed everybody. So the local stations, we were last to get anybody, and we were only allowed on the ice to talk to the players after the game. Well, in this case, once they saw the access we had in Philadelphia, I'm sure they said, we got to rethink this. But they were so great to where we're sitting there, and Adam Burris says, go ahead, pick up the cup. And I said, no, I can't pick up the cup. Are you kidding? I'm a civilian. I didn't play. I didn't win it. He goes, if I say you can pick it up, you can pick it up. I picked it up, hoisted it over my head. My camera guy took a picture of it. It's hanging in my house. And sitting there with Patrick Kane, and we're talking about Elmwood Avenue bars and his high school days. And Scotty still has a house right on the Buffalo Country Club, I believe.
Yeah.
And when he was coaching the Sabres, he talked to me about how much he loved Buffalo. It was his favorite city, still lives there. And of course, his son David had a lot of, issues, a lot of medical issues. And so he stayed in Buffalo. And it turned out Stan not only went to Canisius High School after me, he went to my grammar school, St. Greg's in Williamsville as well. And so we had that, and when he first got the job here, we talked about it and everything else. And, it was great. And Scotty, we got to talking, and it turns out Stan had Mrs. Posteles for third grade. Well, Freddie Posteles was my best friend and lived right behind me in Williamsville. And Mrs. Posteles had worked at St. Greg's for 45 years. And so I said, Scotty, Mrs. Posteles is my neighbor. He goes, oh, my God, I love her so much. She was so great. So, everybody says Buffalo's not a small town. It's a big living room.
Yeah.
So many Buffalo stories like that. And, every single athlete that's come through Chicago, who's also played in Buffalo, regardless of the sport, always makes the comparison. Buffalo's just a smaller Chicago. Chicago's much more cosmopolitan, much more international flavor, but it's the same blue-collar attitude, same kind of weather, even though Buffalo gets a lot more snow than here. Same ethnic mix of people. So the transition here for me was really easy. I remember 1982, I came aboard, and my first week here, somebody said, you're from here, right? What parish are you from? And I'm like, nah, I'm from Buffalo. And they go, same thing. So those are all the wonderful connections. And one of the frustrating things and unfortunate things with Patrick Kane, when he was involved in that alleged rape case, I was on the radio at ESPN, and a lot of my friends, some of whom went to Canisius High School, are lawyers in Buffalo to this day, and they were very close to the situation. And I was basically updating my audience on what they were telling me from behind the scenes. And I think Patrick really took it the wrong way, as if I was accusing him of rape, and I was saying that he was guilty. What I said was, right off the top to these lawyers and all the experts, Frank Sedita III, the prosecutor and so forth, who never prosecuted a case unless he knew he was going to win, researched it to the point where at the outset it looked like a slam dunk, like he was guilty. And then it turns out the mother and the woman were both a couple of whack jobs who staged this bunch of stuff. And Patrick was not liable. He was not guilty. And he completely turned his life around when he went to Switzerland with his mom during the work stoppage, played there, stopped drinking. And now, as I said, it's become one of the great leaders of the team and the union. And before all is said and done, I imagine he'll go down as one of the greatest American players of all time, with Chris Chelios and Mike Modano and my buddy Jeremy Roenick. So all the Buffalo stuff always comes up. And even people outside of my business and outside of sports, there are so many Buffalonians who live in Chicago. It's crazy. And so many of them went to Dayton. So it's weird.
Yes, Dayton. Actually, the president of Dayton right now, Eric Spina, is class of '79. So
right.
We're well represented. You mentioned your radio show. So you have a very popular radio show over there in Chicago. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about what it takes to put together a successful radio show and what you
Well, I'll tell you, having the radio really helps put together the sportscast and vice versa. Because on radio, things are breaking, things are happening right away. You can get a story, you can get a player on the phone with right away. Whereas in television, it takes a while to, get a soundbite from somebody, get a crew out or whatever. But to stay updated, having the radio show really helps give you perspective for your sportscast that day. And I'm lucky enough to do the show with Tom Waddle, former wide receiver for the Bears, greatest guy on earth, and Mark Silverman, Sylvie. It's called the Waddle and Sylvie Show. He was my intern when he was in high school and college. So I've known these guys forever. I covered Tom when he was a player, and we've all become very, very close friends. So the chemistry is there. And when we kick around ideas on the air and take calls from listeners and so forth, it really, really helps to, to have the radio background. Plus, I'm so restricted here doing TV, and it's a very conservative outlet. And I've gotten in trouble many times. I think I've got 7 suspensions under my belt during my career here, whether they be political comments or sarcastic, offhanded comments. Radio, I can get away with a lot more. And, it helps because doing the sportscast, you got to be pretty much on the straight and narrow.
So Dennis McCleary in the comments says that Waddell is a BC guy as well.
Yes, he is.
He says
Dennis was a great player at BC as well.
He says only 7 suspensions as well.
Yeah, well, Dennis knows this story well. I think it was our 35th reunion on the JV field behind school. We had a beer truck there and everything, and we're standing around. And Mike Conley, who was our quarterback back then in the late 60s, he comes up, and we're all standing there, and he proceeded to go right down the line to criticize each one of us. And he was also Mr. Canisius, by the way. And he said, when he got to me, he said, Giangreco, you were just a disciplinary problem, So, yeah, but it all worked out. And Dennis was a great player, not only at Canisius High School, but also at Boston College. And we always said he was Tom Selleck on steroids when he was at Canisius.
Now seems like a good time to open up the floor to questions. So I think I've asked plenty, but if anybody wants to jump in and either ask a question via chat, please do so. Or I think at this point it's okay if you want to just unmute yourself and fire away at Mark.
Yeah, can I pose a question?
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah, this is Mike Shergott in Seattle, class of 61. I miss Buffalo, I will say that very much. But my question is there a future for MLB given the constant arguments about money?
That is a great question, because unlike the NBA and the NBA Players Union, the NHL Players Union, MSL Union, and everything else, the baseball players hate ownership so much. There is so much distrust between the owners and the players in baseball that you've seen why they've been unable to get it together until this point. I think baseball is going to really, really change. It's not going to look like the old days. And during this pandemic, we've had the opportunity to see all these old games on TV, Reds and Orioles in the World Series in 1970, all this great stuff. And frankly, less is better to me. You don't see any graphics on the video, and the announcers are so great, these legendary voices. But it was a different game back then. And I'm all for, I got to tell you, I'm all for 7-inning games permanently. And as I said earlier, I'm all for reducing the season to 80 games, instead of 162, because I just don't think the product fits today's world. And I don't think the last 2 generations identify with baseball. So they're going to have to do a lot. I mean, the purists are going crazy. Bob Costas is going out of his mind when they're tinkering with things like putting a guy on second base to start extra innings, DH permanently in both leagues. What I'm really interested to see is how they're not going to spit and put their fingers in their mouth. But I think Major League Baseball is in big trouble. And I think, attendance is way down. They're surviving on their still, relatively huge television contracts. But everything's going to be piecemealed out. One network's not going to own baseball. They're going to be on all different kinds of social media platforms. I mean, they already are. But I think MLB's in trouble.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Andy, looks like you might have a question.
Yeah, no, I'll ask one. Mark, nice to meet you. I'm actually supposed to be one of the broadcasters for a Cubs minor league affiliate, what was supposed to be this season. So my question for you is, as you've gone through your line of work, what is the way that you've learned to build those relationships with those players, and how has that changed over the last couple decades or so?
Well, first, congratulations. What affiliate were you going to be working for?
I was supposed to be in Myrtle Beach.
Oh,
Advanced
awesome.
Day.
That's great. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, I think more so in the minors, if you're doing play-by-play and you're going to be around the team every day, obviously it's only natural you're going to cultivate great relationships with the players. It's not about being a homer, although, you know, you can be. Of course, you're going to be employed by the team.
Yeah.
I think you have to earn their trust first, and then they open up to you. And obviously, you have to have that balance where you can't cover for them, but at the same time, you know, you don't want to be ripping them on the air. So,
Right.
I mean, you look like a young guy. I'm sure you can relate to the players, pretty much the same age. That's always an advantage. And I just think work on your craft. Don't copy any other announcer. Take cues from other people. But you've got to be yourself. I mean, if you try to be somebody else on the air, people notice it right away. And I think it's just like taking swings in the cage. You just got to keep doing it, and you're going to get your break. And all of a sudden, you're going to be in AA and AAA, and, well, look out, you're in the majors. So that's my advice. I think, again, things have changed to where maybe not in the minors, but major league teams for sure, they try to keep the media at bay. So I think you're going to have a little more of an advantage to be able to be in there. And again, I never hung around with players, you know, outside of work, maybe one or two during my 45 years in the business. I'd like to keep it separate, but if you can strike that balance, then they're going to trust you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Mark, Paul Zablocki decided to light a match and ask a question about the Sabres. So what is your opinion on the future of the Sabres, both on the ice and off?
Oh, God. I can't believe how loyal Sabres fans are, given what they've done or haven't done. Jack Eichel wanting to leave, and everybody upset with ownership, and you got a GM change and everything else. And I talk to my close friends, and they're like, you know, it's the same old thing. It's the same old thing. They got to shake that thing up, turn it upside down. I mean, Sabre fans deserve more. And, you know, I still have the T-shirt that says "in the crease." So I don't know what the answer is there, but I think the Pakulas have done wonders in renovating the entire city of Buffalo. I was just there a few months ago, and I was shocked how downtown is finally cleaned up, and how, you know, young professionals are moving downtown. Warehouses are now lofts. I mean, every other city did this 30 years ago, but at least New York State infused billions of dollars, and the city looks like a real major league city now. And, you know, the Bills are always going to be the Bills no matter what. But I think the Sabres really need to get their fan base back, because when you got a guy like Jack Eichel trying to be diplomatic, but at the same time saying, you know what, I'm almost out of here, that should be a wake-up call right there.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to jump in and ask Mark any Sabres or non-Sabres related questions?
Yeah. Sabre related. For how many players could the Sabres, or how many players could the Sabres get for Eichel?
Oh, well, I think they could get 2 number ones and maybe 2 second line guys. How about that?
Wow, really?
Well, I think he's in that upper echelon, you know, and who knows what he could do on another team. I think that's what other GMs are looking at. Like, could we have a Leon Draisaitl on our hands, you know, somebody like that to go with your other superstar? You know, it's something to ponder, but, you know, everybody leaves Buffalo, you know, and that's got to stop.
Yeah.
It's Ryan O'Reilly in St. Louis with a cup, you know.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
We have another question in the chat here about Stan Bowman's future in Chicago. Any chance that he's going to come home to Buffalo? And I'll tack on to that. Any chance Pat Kane is ever going to head back to Buffalo to finish out his career?
Well, when Patrick was in trouble, and pictures of him laying on the floor in a bar in Wisconsin, again, well documented him, and his cousin punching out a cab driver in Buffalo, and all the stuff Patrick was involved in when he was young and reckless. The Blackhawks basically called him in the office after the last episode. It turned out to be a not guilty for him. They said, look, one more thing and you're out of here. And, I think he would have wound up in Buffalo had he gone down that path. And Buffalo would have forgiven him and he would have been the savior. Who knows what the future holds for the Blackhawks? I can't imagine them trading either Jonathan Toews or Patrick Kane, but it's not out of the question. It really isn't. I think Stan Bowman's future here is kind of up in the air with John McDonough suddenly being let go. So we'll see. We did talk to Stan. We Zoomed with him a few weeks ago, just talking about the whole NHL situation. And he seemed firmly entrenched, but you never know. And if the Blackhawks decide that, we're going to have to completely retool and rebuild, and they trade Toews and they trade Kane, well, the only natural place for Patrick is to go to Buffalo, and that would be the biggest story ever. You think a lot of people met Terrell Owens at the airport? Jeez. I mean, that would be huge. But I don't know. I hope Stan sticks around, but I think his future is up in the air right now as well.
Yeah. Do you feel like they've done a good job of managing that cap situation? I know, between Pat and Jonathan, they've had, every once in a while you see a story pop up about, how are they going to manage these big contracts? But I mean, so far it seems like they've managed to remain competitive.
Well, Stan did a great job initially when winning those 3 cups. He was really adept at finding all the replacement interchangeable parts to go around that core of 5. And that's how they won those 3 cups. You had Kane, Toews, you had Hossa, you had Duncan Keith, and you had a couple other guys. And then, every year you just had some mercenaries who you just plugged in for a year or so. And there were 4th-line guys who really did the job. Now, lately, that hasn't clicked for Stan, and guys haven't worked out. Look, when they signed Toews and Kane to those identical deals, they knew they were going to be in trouble down the road. So, and here, the chickens have come home to roost now. Now they're stuck, and they know what to do. Duncan Keith is basically underpaid for being such a great defenseman. But some other guys have some ridiculous contracts, and Kane and Toews, have to be paid, and they're not going anywhere right now. But again, the rumors are there that no one's untouchable.
Right. Steven asks, sports are fun. Why do you think they are important? And I'm assuming there's a right now on the end of that. Why do you think they're important right now?
Because they always have been, and more so now, a total escape. Yeah. My job is sports, but everybody else's job is something else, and they rely on sports for their getaway. Young kids idolize athletes. Adults want to be those athletes. A lot of people hate their jobs, hate their situation, or are just bored. It's kind of a mundane existence. Sports is the purest form of entertainment in this country. And I was saying, I can do without the NBA. It would hurt not having the NHL, but I would live. I'm not a soccer fan. But if there's no NFL, in college basketball and college football, I can take it or leave it as well. If there's no NFL, this whole country is going to explode. Yeah. It really is. It's scary. It's going to be Armageddon. So I just think sports are technically non-essential, but in the real world, they are absolutely essential because they're the greatest escape. They really are. You have all the drama. You have all the action, all the color. You have all the personalities, and you just marvel at the athletic feats. So I think it's the purest form of entertainment there is.
Agree. Dennis McCleary asks, how do you think the Bills did in the draft?
They did great. They did fantastic. They're getting A- and B+, and they're stockpiling. I just hope the Cam Newton thing hasn't got everybody scared. You know,
I haven't heard anybody here that's scared of Cam Newton yet.
Okay, well, listen, I mean, I'm afraid that he might actually be in shape this time and not injured and, you know, playing for the minimum. He wants to get even with a lot of people. He's got a chip on his shoulder. And, you know, as much as I despise and hate Bill Belichick and Robert Kraft, you know, it's the greatest organization in football. And I'm afraid that Belichick's going to be able to change his whole approach to that offense with, you know, Josh McDaniels. I mean, with Brady, it was the quintessential West Coast, just protect the quarterback and let him dink and doink down the field and then go deep. And I assume that Newton's going to have to pass a lot more, but he's also going to run because that's who he is. And if they change up that offense and they still have a good defense, it's going to be Bills, Patriots for the division. But the Bills defense is already rock solid. And this Josh Allen just has to take the next step. And here in Chicago, it's all about the blown pick on Mitch Trubisky. And I just resent the fact that some people compare Josh Allen to Mitch Trubisky. There's no comparison whatsoever. I mean, Josh has his, you know, accuracy issues, no question, just like Mitch. But I think Josh is a lot smarter and a lot stronger. I just think what the Bills did in this draft was exceptional. So, and once again, I could never be able to figure out the Bills draft the best corners ever, and then they never stay because they can't pay them. So I hope that all changes now. You know.
Any sense of, you mentioned you're spoken like a true Bills fan, your hatred of Bill Belichick and the Patriots. Any sense
visceral hatred. Yeah.
I mean, not a lot of, you know, when they just got dinged for cheating with Cincinnati, and, you know, you never hear a ton from other teams publicly about what they think about that stuff. Any sense, you know, from your time around the Bears or anybody else privately, what they tend to think about that stuff? Is this, you know, are they the only ones doing it? Is it more widespread? Do, you know, are people as mad at them privately as we all are publicly?
I think everybody does it to a degree. The Patriots have just perfected it, and they have a long history of cheating, and they get away with it because Robert Kraft is in that echelon of owners with Jerry Jones and maybe one or two other guys. They run the show, and it's all about which white-haired, rich white guy has more money and more power. And, you know, you got to remember at all times the commissioner is hired by the owners. And Roger Goodell, you know, he perpetuates this kind of thing. It's his duty, just like his predecessors, to generate billions and billions of dollars moving forward and just keep feeding the monster machine. And they've only been forced into safety issues and forced into Black Lives Matter and forced into taking a stand on all these social issues, lying about concussions for 50 years. And I think, you know, guys like Robert Kraft are always going to get away with it. And Belichick's perfected it. And he thinks he's above any rules. And granted, you know, there's no question. He's the greatest coach in NFL history. There is no question about that. And failed players and troubled players and coach killers go to the Patriots and they perform. Randy Moss, Chad Ochocinco. Now you got Cam Newton going there. All these guys who other coaches and owners couldn't deal with. You know, Antonio Brown, I mean, they even took a flyer on him. He catches a touchdown pass right away. But, you know, who knows? He may wind up in Tampa now because, you know, whatever Brady says goes down there. So I just think that, you know, the Patriots are a cut above every other franchise in the NFL, both in the best ways and the worst ways.
Sure. So Dennis McCleary says, what about moving reunion to Boston when CHS plays Boston College High on October 3rd? BC and Clemson Friday night. So I don't know if we can move the whole reunion, but we are planning on coming down there. And if we're allowed to be together, we're going to try to do an alumni thing down there. So if anybody wants to fly into Boston for that weekend, we can. If we're allowed to party, we'll certainly do that.
Hey, I am all for that. I'll go anywhere once this is over. You know, we originally had 8 guys trying to get together, 7 of us from 6 different states. You know, it's dicey, but I can't wait for things to return to the new normal. It's never going to be the old normal, but the new normal, we need to have a reunion. Like I said, I was in Buffalo a few months ago. I actually drove to CHS and talked my way into the auditorium. The security guard said, "You can't come in here. It's after school hours." I said, "Hey, I went to school here. I just want to see my picture in the auditorium." They go, "Yeah, right." So he let me go up the steps, and the class of 70 used to be right in the front, right there before you walked into where the seats are. Now they moved it to where it's behind the fire extinguisher on the right, way in the back. And my face is cut off by the frame, on one side. And the security guide's like, "You didn't go here." I go, "That's me right there." He goes, "Get out," But I'm glad
we'll make sure that's fixed this summer.
Yeah, would you please? But yeah, tell Dennis. I got to talk to Dennis later anyway. Yeah, we got to come up with a plan B for sure.
We have 100 years of pictures that need to be readjusted and reframed, so we're getting there slowly but surely.
But don't put the old guys in the back.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's almost 8:30. We probably have time for just one more question if anybody's got anything for Mark. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, real quick. If Kane came back to Buffalo for the Sabres, would Eichel stay?
Oh, God, yes. I think so, but Kane's not going to come back anytime soon. I'm talking about Kane at the very end of his career, where he's come back to pad his stats.
Yeah.
And hopefully the Sabres had stockpiled enough talent to where it could be a Ray Bourque situation where Kane could win another cup as a Sabre in his last year. I mean, that's fantasy stuff, but
yeah, it is.
That'd be cool.
Fantasy, but so what?
Yeah, right.
Mark, before we go, I got to ask, Cubs or White Sox?
Me as a fan?
Mm-hmm.
Well, since I wasn't born and raised here, I can appreciate both. And God, Sox fans just detest Cub fans so much. And I think Cub fans just kind of put up with Sox fans. That's the difference. Because the stereotype is Cub fans are, North Side yuppies who just like to go and drink beer and get some sun and don't pay attention to the game. And South Side fans are real baseball fans and are into the strategy and everything else. I will tell you this. Wrigley Field is still the coolest ballpark in the world, with Fenway second, but Guaranteed Rate Field has the absolute best baseball food of any stadium. And Sox fans and Cubs fans are really, really different. It's not like Cubs-Cardinals rivalry where it's so nice and respectful, because St. Louis people are just so nice. They have no teeth. They're not badasses at all. They're very friendly. But Sox-Cubs fans, even when those crosstown games didn't count, that was the most important thing in the world. So Sox fans are rough and tough and love their baseball. And, Cub fans, they'll claim that, they're diehard and just as loyal. But it's two completely different cultures, just like both sides of this town. So I don't have to pick, because when I go on the air, I just kind of play with it. And then, when I'm out on the street, people always come up to me and go, "You're a Cub fan, I can tell." And then the next guy will go, "You're a Sox fan, I can tell." And I'm like, well, give me a break. I'm a Bills and Sabres fan. I don't tell anybody.
Well, as a Sox fan, you're always welcome on our side. So.
Okay, cool. Well, hey, this was the worst thing that could ever happen to that team this year, because they've got so much young talent, and Sox fans have been waiting so long. And I mean, they could really put it together. And like GM Rick Hahn said the other day, we got 60 games. So you're going to win 20, you're going to lose 20. It's what you do with the last 20. And, it's going to have an asterisk beside it, whoever wins the World Series. But it would be so cool to see the Sox finally get over the Cubs,
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
So it's a little after 8:30. We should probably wrap it up. I know you've had a long day. I just wanted to say before we go, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're pulling double duty and all over the place now with everything going on. So thank you so much for taking time to speak with all of us. And thanks to everyone on the call who asked questions and participated. It's always good to see everybody, even virtually, and hopefully we'll get to see everybody soon in person. So with that, Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thanks again to all of you.
Hey, thank you guys, Jay. Great job. I really appreciate your efforts, and really enjoyed talking Buffalo. So I'll be back soon. And thanks again. It was an honor.